Okay, so today we're going to be looking at a case study of how democracies respond to and try to address terrorist groups. And to do that, we're going to be looking at the Basque Country as a case study. So, where is the Basque Country and why are we going to use this as our example? Well, the Basque Country is a region in northern Spain and southern France. It's predominantly in northern Spain. And the Basque Country is an area where there are a group of people, the Basques, who believe that they should have, and many of them believe they should have independence from Spain, from France, and have their own independent countries. And there are a lot of unique features about the Basque Country of why they view themselves as a particular nation that deserves to have its independence. They have a number of unique features. They have their own language, and their language doesn't actually share any common roots with any other European language. So it's interesting in that respect. Their genetics are somewhat different as well. And they have a high preponderance of a particularly rare type of a rare blood type, and they're also it's been hard to find linkages between them and other European groups. And so there's been some interesting studies that have tried to determine when the Basque people migrated into Europe, and it's argued that they were some of the first groups to actually migrate into the European subcontinent. And they also have a number of cultural distinctions. They have, besides language, traditions, things like this that differentiate them from the rest of Spain and France. And so they've long resisted rule by the Spanish government. And this predates Spain even becoming a democracy. And we'll talk about this a little bit more here in a minute. But just wanted to give you a little bit of a foregrounding in terms of the Basque Country, what it's like, and why that they actually have had an extensive amount of terrorist incidents in the past. And that is because, especially a group called Euskadi Ta Askatasuna, or abbreviated ETA, has really tried to escalate violence to bring about and achieve independence for the Basque Country. And they were formed in 1959, and they really emerged as the repression of the Spanish authoritarian government expanded. Spain stopped being a democracy in 1939 and was run by the totalitarian dictator Francisco Franco, who really wanted to centralize power, didn't allow elections, and really maintained strict control over the Basque Country, not recognizing their cultural distinctions, trying to impose the Spanish language on them. And the group formed to really push back against this push back against the injustices of the Francisco Franco regime. And they've engaged and carried out a number of terrorist attacks since their founding in 1959. It's estimated that they've killed about 829 people. Some of the most significant terrorist attacks they've carried out: one in 2004, they detonated a bomb in the Madrid train station, and they also were responsible for, and I believe around 2008 or 2010, blew up a parking terminal at the Madrid airport. So they've really tried to carry out a number of terror attacks in the heartland of Spain, particularly Madrid, to push back against the government, as well as targeting what they perceive as Spanish government buildings in the Basque Country. And so, how has Spain responded and the Spanish government tried to deal with the Basque Country? Well, as I said, from 1936 is the beginning of the Spanish Civil War, and after Francisco Franco wins the Spanish Civil War in 1939, it's an authoritarian dictatorship from then until 1977, when there is a democratic transition. And the government of Spain carry out a number of atrocities, torturing, murdering, imprisoning a lot of people in the Basque Country to try to repress them. And this is really where the ETA movement emerges out of. But even after we have the transition to democracy, we see a number of different responses that the Spanish democratic government tried to take to dealing with the Basque Country. The Spanish government, even after becoming a democracy, is not willing to consider granting independence to the Basque Country, although they did grant a lot of powers, devolve a lot of powers to the Basque local governments after the transition to democracy, and it's actually one of the most, argued to be the most autonomous region in all of Europe. So they have a lot of capacity now, and especially after the transition to democracy, to make decisions that the Spanish government doesn't interfere with. But there's still a lot of individuals in the Basque Country, and especially the ETA as an organization, that wanted full independence. And in a lot of instances, when the government felt that the Spanish government was unable to negotiate with the Basque terrorists, they perceived the Basque terrorists as carrying out attacks on civilians. They were willing and illegally used a number of what we would call kill squads in the 1980s, where the government would fund paramilitary groups to try to target and take out leaders of the Basque separatist movement, and especially the ETA. But it also was these kill squads were responsible for killing a number of civilians as well, who were viewed as innocent. And the exposure of these brutal tactics really did mar the new Spanish democracy's legacy in a lot of respects, because it showed the government's willingness to engage in brutal repressive tactics that had thought to be a thing of the past once the authoritarian government ended in Spain and the dictatorship was over. And so after the 1980s and especially the exposure of these kill squads funded by the government has gone back and forth in terms of the tactics that they've used. The government of Spain has been willing at various points to try to negotiate peace with the Basques, with the Basque separatists, but also have refused to negotiate at times, especially after significant terrorist attacks. The government's been unwilling and really tried to use to the full extent that it can without using kill squads anymore, or at that point in the 1990s without using kill squads, but really engage in a significant law enforcement crackdown on these particular groups. And eventually, though, the Spanish government did negotiate a peace deal. And in 2011, they negotiated a peace deal with the ETA, which was the most violent organization, the largest organization in the Basque Country that was advocating for independence. And it was a fairly international effort to try to bring about this peace agreement, and brought in a lot of individuals who have been involved in certain foreign policy positions around the world to try to negotiate the peace in a way to try to build a sense of trust, because the Spanish government, the Basque separatists, had very little trust in each other, and by bringing in these international leaders to try to foster and facilitate a peace agreement, it was seen by both sides as hopefully being more legitimate and really bringing about the change they needed in establishing an agreement that they could both come to terms with to end the violence that had taken place. And this is a press conference of the peace agreements. As you can see here, one of the individuals here, Kofi Annan, was the former UN Secretary General, was involved in the negotiating process and helped broker the deal. So really extremely high profile individuals from all over the world were brought in to try to help end one of the longest military conflicts in Western Europe after the end of the Second World War. And eventually the Spanish government was able to come to an agreement, and the Basque ETA came to the agreement and signed terms that brought more independence, not complete independence, but more control to the Basque Country, and really led to the ultimate disbanding of the ETA. And so this was a very successful attempt where democratic governments and terrorist groups were able to find a peaceful solution and end the violence. So with that, I'm going to leave it there, give you your third discussion question for the day, and that is, what kind of advantage or disadvantage might a democracy like Spain have for ending a terrorist problem like the Basque Country? Again, what kind of advantage or disadvantage might a democracy like Spain have for ending a terrorist problem like the Basque Country. Leave it there for today. Thanks so much for listening.